Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Burtukaana natural processed Ethiopia from Sweven Coffee. There's the box right there. And Sweven, based out of Bristol, England. And they were originally a suggestion to us by Yokata. So shout out to and thank you to Yokata for the suggestion. This is Sweven's second ever appearance on this channel, having previously reviewed one of their Koji processed Colombian coffees. So I was very excited to see them at the local coffee shop, as it felt like a great opportunity to revisit them. We will also be reviewing one of their wash processed coffees, but for now we will see how this Ethiopia turned out, as this right here is day 38. The recipe we went with for this coffee was a lower extraction recipe at a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 92 degrees Celsius, about 199 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, as I will say, a little bit more tricky to tell when it comes to more processed coffees. Sweven, on the other hand, is one of the lighter roasting coffee roasters that we've ever had from England, and this one is also a filter roast from them, so you can definitely tell that this coffee is on the lighter side of things, at least relative to a lot of other British coffee roasters. So I feel like most people would align this one with being on the lighter side of that medium light in terms of that roast profile. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we opted for the V60, and the cup was coming out a slight bit cleaner than initially expected, with a fair bit of the classic blueberry and peachy attributes associated with natural processed Ethiopian coffees. The listed jasmine made a lot of sense, as there was a very strong perfumey florality to the cup. In addition to that, there was a slightly robust chocolate aspect, as well as plenty of fruit sweetness. So a lot of the expected natural characteristics, though still coming a little bit on the more clean side of things. So an okay first impression. We continue on to day 17, as we opted for the Chemex, and there were similar issues to the previous day, as there was a slight bit less clarity now. It was offering much more of the modern fermenting natural Ethiopian aspects, with a very strong fermented blueberry component to it. There were ever so slight hints of cacao, as well as a slightly smoky quality, so as a result, this one was just okay, not even necessarily as good as that first impression. But we continue on to day 20, as we opted for the April brewer, and it's improved, as a fair bit of the fermentiness is notably less intense through this brew method. It's now yielding a much more deep, sweeter citric component in line with the listed papaya. That's the best and closest thing I could associate that with, though it also felt maybe a little bit more pineapple-like, a little bit more of a ripened pineapple to this cup. Perfumey jasmine aspects still continue to remain very present and pronounced, with a slight caramel as well as fermenting quality lingering in the finish. Better, but for the most part, still just an okay cup. Day 23 through the V60, and the cup continues to remain the same, with much more of the fermenting aspects to the cup present at the forefront, so a little bit more intensified in that sense. We'll need some adjustments to tone this down, as the very strong perfumey blueberry floral expression to the cup seems to really dominate it, with a slight graining quality as well. So really not necessarily enjoying this one at this time, as a lot of the more heavier aspects of the natural processed coffees were really starting to pick up on this day. Day 26 through the Chemex, and even then I opted to go with the V60 from this point going forward, as this one was almost wininess to an extent, as there was that winey acidity that you can get from a lot of natural processed coffees. A fair bit of the heaviness continues to remain strong, with a lot of the perfumey aspects of it once again. Robust chocolate and fermentiness, with a slight bit of that classic blueberry aspect to it. So really didn't enjoy this cup to this day, and it continued to feel like I just needed to make some adjustments to get this coffee to a point I wanted. Day 29 drastically lowered the temperatures, and it helped a lot in terms of the fermentiness, and that's why we do have lower temperatures on this one, as there is still the strong perfumey berry components to it, but in a significantly more toned down measure. Clarity has gone up as a result of that, though there is a slight bit of an increased graininess, and that's what was kind of funny about this coffee, is while I was able to tone down those aspects, it just resulted in some of the other less clean aspects of this one coming to the forefront. A little bit more of the tropicality as well, so some positive trade-offs overall from this day. We continue on to day 32, as we continued along the same lines. Lower temperatures, and it's the best it's been to this point, with a slight bit more clarity yet again. better definition, slight dark chocolate and caramelized aspects, though still very berry forward with a tropicality and a notable less amount of graininess. Day 35, final notes we have through DV60, and the cup continues to remain pretty consistent as it has a slight bit of the fermentiness present yet again, though it does feel like it's improving with both the adjustments as well as time, as this seems like the best cup we've had up to this point. Grainy quality continues to remain present enough to the point that it's a notable aspect of this coffee. More of the chocolate and caramelized aspects yet again, but for the most part you are experiencing a lot of the stronger, dark, perfumey as well as berry aspects of this coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so let's go through those, and we'll start with the finish level 4. And as I usually say when it comes to natural or heavier processed coffees, having the finish at a level 4 is actually a little bit of a win, because usually when it reaches that level 5 mark, the cup is a little too intense for me. So this one scoring at that level 4 is a good indicator that this coffee didn't reach the point where I found it to be too overbearing, too intense, and too heavy. So level 4 works really nice. It has a much more even finish than I think a lot of the notes leading up to this point would necessarily insinuate. Sweetness, level 4. Yeah, that part's definitely unsurprising, as there's a lot of fruit sweetness within this one, a lot of the classic Ethiopian sweetness. One thing I wanted to say on that is that it's pretty surprising to me that there isn't any sort of berry note on here, unless you want to count the listed watermelon note that they have, as the berry seemed to be the most notable prominent aspect of this one. Essentially, it tasted like so many of the classic natural processed Ethiopian coffees, and that's why it was kind of interesting to me that that wasn't a note that they had featured at least. Florality, level 4. Honestly, that was the most consistent, pronounced, and prominent note within this coffee throughout, as I feel like maybe that's where they were kind of leaning towards when it came to that more dark aspect of this one, as there were so many of those, we'll just say, strong floral components to it, that very perfumey florality that I keep referencing, but mostly because it was there. And oftentimes I feel like the line between that and maybe a blueberry or darker berry component can be a little bit muddied, and maybe that's what happened here, as I felt like both of those things were definitely present within this one, and that actually does kind of transition us into the berry fruit scoring at the level 4 mark, because for me, while I didn't necessarily get a whole lot of the watermelon components, which is actually a good thing, because usually when there's a lot of watermelon in a coffee, I find it to be too overbearing, but a little bit more in terms of that blueberry sense. So having both those things score at that level 4 is a little bit of an indication that I experienced both of them. It did feel both floral and it did feel both fruit sweet, and that's why I'm comfortable with both of those being at that level 4 mark, neither of which overbearing in this cup. Then we have a bunch of level 3s. We'll actually start with the acidity level 3. The acidity may not have necessarily been as bright as I was expecting. Now, granted, I did make the tasting wheel of this coffee with the other coffee that we're going to be discussing, and that one, unsurprisingly, had a little bit more acidity to it. Nonetheless, I feel like the 3 was the best place to put this one, as I may have been expecting it to be around that mark right from the start. Citrus fruit, level 3. I'd mentioned briefly that there were some times I experienced a little bit more of a pineapple-like attribute to it. Again, they have a papaya note listed on here, and truth be told, I wasn't getting as much of the tropicality in this cup as I was the more heavier, darker aspects of it, specifically, again, that berry florality that was present within it. So citrus fruit, level 3, a little bit more of an undefined, though at times I found it to be a little bit more precise of a citric aspect to this one. Stone fruit, level 3. Right at the onset, I was experiencing a slight bit of the peachiness to it, but I think maybe a lot of that is lost because the other attributes in this one are pretty heavy and pretty pronounced, that oftentimes that can be overlooked. When I was really focusing on it, I said, I can see some slight stone fruits, maybe some slightly sweeter stone fruits, and while I may have experienced an ever so slight and fleeting peachiness at the forefront, there were some more of those mango-like attributes that I do tend to experience a little bit more with natural processed coffees. Caramel level 3. Yeah, there was an interesting kind of caramelized aspect to this coffee throughout, and I think that's why that score is there at that level 3. I don't have any issues with that. Body level 3. Yeah, it had maybe a little bit more body and texture than initially expecting. So again, when we discuss the other coffee, you'll kind of see side by side making these tasting wheels why I placed it here. I will say that this one may be on the slightly lower side of level 3, but still a level 3 nonetheless, that it has a little bit more of that medium body component to it. And then final thing we're discussing, and the most important thing for me on this tasting wheel, which is the cleanliness level 3. So I had to work pretty hard to get it up there at that level 3 mark, as right from the start I was feeling a fair bit of the fermentiness, but I even said, okay, this will at least be a level 3, and then working through this cup I said, okay, it'll be a challenge to keep it at the level 3. But by the end, I could say that it is a little bit more in terms of that medium clarity, medium cleanliness, which oftentimes is what I'm at the very minimum hoping for from natural processed coffees. This one lent itself towards that, being kind of middle of the pack, kind of standard, a lot of what you'd expect from a natural processed coffee, scoring that there at that level 3 mark. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Let me actually start with some of the huge positives. I have a lot of appreciation for this coffee roaster because there aren't many English coffee roasters, at least that I'm familiar with, that have trended a little bit more in the modern and lighter direction in general. So that's why I was really excited to revisit and review Sweven once again, because I do remember that from the first time we tried their coffees, and I'd been monitoring their coffees for a significant amount of time. As you probably know, it's not the cheapest thing to order British coffees in the United States and vice versa. So for that reason, I haven't had an opportunity to purchase maybe some of their other coffees that caught my interest a little bit more than something like this. But it was nice to try at least one of their natural processed coffees, even if this one wasn't necessarily what I was looking for. That's essentially to say that this one just reminded me of so many of these similar types of coffees that we've had in the past, as it had a lot of heavier aspects to it. It skewed a lot more in the fruit sweets direction, and it didn't seem to reach the level of clarity, that level 4 that I hope for with every single coffee. And I definitely hope for in natural processed coffees, because if it reaches that mark, it's truly something special. But as a result, I would say it was a fine natural processed Ethiopian coffee, and as far as British coffee roasters go, I think that's on the better side of things, so I'm keeping that in mind when kind of discussing this review in general. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, this one definitely does lend itself towards the more modern natural Ethiopian drinker, because this is the epitome of that. It has all of the characteristics that you can expect for something like that. Of course, the sweeter profile, the very strong aspects, the very strong perfuminess, the very strong berry component, the very strong just in general sweet profiles that are present within this one, the sweet fruit profiles that are present within this one, while at the same time maybe sacrificing a slight bit of clarity to get that intensity to the cup. And I feel like if you really wanted to go the other direction, you can get out even more of the intensity that's present within this one, though obviously that's not the direction I want it to go, but it's going to be the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Burtukaana natural processed Ethiopia from Sweven Coffee. Thank you for watching.